Hello, and welcome to the Dairy News and Views podcast, a production of the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach Dairy Team. Our podcast covers current educational, research, and industry tools available to produce the highest quality dairy products efficiently and effectively. Thanks for joining us today on Dairy News and Views from the ISU Dairy Team. I'm Jenn Bentley, Northeast Iowa Dairy Field Specialist. I'm here today with Fred Hall, our Northwest Iowa Dairy Field Specialist, as we facilitate today's episode. Thanks for joining in today, Fred.
Thank you, Jen. It's always a pleasure.
Today, we're joined by Dr. Danelle Bickett-Weddle from Iowa State University on today's podcast as she discusses her work in maintaining cattle biosecurity in the midst of COVID-19. Danelle, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
Danelle, can you first tell us a little about yourself, maybe some of your background on what you're doing with Iowa State University?
Certainly. I'm a veterinarian, graduate of Iowa State University, and currently serve as the Associate Director of the Center for Food Security and Public Health, which is based at the College of Veterinary Medicine. In that role, I develop education materials on a variety of topics. Our audience is veterinarians, livestock producers, and the public, anybody who owns or interacts with animals. I also have an appointment with ISU Extension. I support efforts across ag and natural resources on disaster preparedness and biosecurity. I also have a great opportunity. I'm serving as the president of the American College of Veterinary Preventive Medicine. So we're a group of veterinarians that are board certified in veterinary preventive medicine. And with COVID, many of our members are actively involved in those response efforts. I just began my presidency of the American Association of Extension Veterinarians in October. So preventive medicine, outreach, those are my true passions.
Well, that's great to hear, Danelle. And National Milk Producers Federation has been a partner over the years during the development and the implementation of the Secure Milk Supply Plan for continuity of business in the event of food and mouth disease outbreak. How did the recent article, Maintaining Cattle Biosecurity in the Midst of COVID-19, come about?
The resources we developed under the Secure Milk Supply Plan are focused on preparing for a catastrophic event. In that case, an animal disease that might stop milk movement to control the highly contagious animal disease called foot and mouth disease, or FMD. When COVID-19 caused the market disruptions and producers were dumping wholesome milk on farms, National Milk Producers Federation Vice President for Sustainability and Scientific Affairs, Dr. Jamie Jonker, somebody I've worked with over the years, reached out to me about available resources, something from Secure Milk that might apply to this human pandemic. So our conversation evolved to some of the challenges that are being faced on farms with workers. Again, COVID being a human disease, what are some of the challenges of them coming to work and continuing all the cattle care, cattle biosecurity? So my background in public health and extensive work on biosecurity resources led us to create this resource for dairy producers.
What is the relationship between this human disease outbreak and biosecurity in cattle?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that COVID-19 is not known to cause disease in cattle. COVID-19 is a human disease that causes respiratory symptoms like coughing, fever, shortness of breath, and even death in people that suffer from severe cases. The biosecurity principles that we've used for years to keep cattle healthy can be applied to protect people from COVID-19, while also increasing protection from well-known zoonotic diseases. Those are the diseases that animals can spread to people, things like salmonella, crypto. We're working on trying to keep our workers from those types of diseases anyway. So those biosecurity principles kind of overlap. Well, if you ask livestock producers and cattle veterinarians about dealing with population biosecurity, it's something they've been doing for years, and they have a lot of knowledge, and that can be applied to people dealing with the COVID-19 outbreak.
What are some of the similarities about biosecurity in cattle and COVID-19 in people?
Great question, Fred. Battling an enemy that you can't see is hard. Right? Whether it's on our dairy farms thinking about a bacteria like Staph aureus that causes contagious mastitis in cattle, or this coronavirus that's causing COVID-19 in people. So one of the things I like listeners to do is kind of picture the dairy as a castle. And picture the workers on that dairy as the well-trained armored soldiers. And the cattle are the commodity that produce milk for the kingdom. So for COVID-19, we need to focus on providing the best armor, which in this case is scientifically based information about that enemy virus, and then a battle plan to keep the soldiers healthy, and protective gear for when our soldiers have to enter into dangerous situations. Healthy employees and family members are essential to the continued cattle health and well-being on our farm. So some of the principles that we use to separate employees into certain parts of the operation for cattle diseases are taking precautions of hand washing, all serve to prevent exposure risks to and from people when it comes to COVID-19 as well. If these same workers had any cattle disease organisms on their hands or their clothing, having them work in dedicated workspaces and providing hand washing can also prevent cattle from exposure to cattle diseases.
What kind of guidance is covered in the article, Maintaining Cattle Biosecurity in the Midst of COVID-19?
There's three big sections in that article. One is information. I mentioned early on, in order to protect, arm ourselves, that scientifically based information is where we kind of start. We provide a lot of links to resources that producers can read for more information about COVID, largely focused on resources from the CDC or the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Communication plans are so important, and the National Milk Producers Federation Farm Program has an excellent emergency contact poster that walks producers through that step. So in that information section, we also point out the great resources that National Milk has put out for their members. The next part of that article is the battle plan against COVID-19 spread between people on the dairy. And lastly is the protective gear section, right? We talked about how do we protect our soldiers, which includes the recommendations for gloves and cloth masks when that 6 foot of social distancing, in this example, right, 1 cow length apart. If that's not possible in places like the parlor, the milk house, and break rooms, what can we do to further protect our people? Again, since you can't eat or drink with a face mask on, having space for team members to spread out or staggering break times is one of the subjects we talk about in the article.
Danelle, the battle plan sounds like a pretty serious topic. What are some of the recommendations for dairy producers to battle COVID-19 in their personnel while also battling cattle diseases through biosecurity?
And, it kind of is a serious topic, right? We've not faced something of this magnitude in our human health population for over 100 years, right? We have to look back to the 1918 Spanish flu challenge. So one of the strategies we talk about in this article is limiting personnel to those that are essential for animal care, milking, feeding, and treatment. So whenever possible, if we can dedicate employees or family members to specific areas of the farm where they can avoid close contact with each other, this practice will actually help minimize the spread of cattle disease, right? Because we're segregating populations of people into different groups, as well as keeping employees and family members safe from COVID spread. Whenever we have, off-farm people working with on-farm, we do worry about that risk. Another strategy in that document is to make sure our guidance documents for our dairy, often called standard operating procedures, are written and updated for those essential tasks. This human disease can have significant impact on workers' health and ability to come to work. One only has to look at the impact in our packing plant workers to see this type of disruption to normal routine. So I always ask this with my audience. So raise your hand if you've ever worked with another human being. Now, if you're driving in your car, keep both hands on the wheel. But if we have somebody that does not come to work, it certainly impacts our day. So you either have more work to do over more time, you work a longer day, or maybe you got the same amount of time to get twice as much done. In those cases, things might slip through the cracks. And especially if you haven't done that job before, if it's new to you. So it's essential that we document these things, we write things down, we update or create our standard operating procedures. And whenever possible, we want to cross-train team members on the essential tasks to make sure that they get done repeatedly. Poorly trained or rushed people, and no matter what job they're in, whether it's a dairy farm or working at a grocery store or somebody that's been asked to teach online that's never done it before, you might take some shortcuts. And if that shortcut relates to a biosecurity step, because sometimes those can take time to do well in your day, cattle health could suffer as a result.
And Danelle, dairy farms are hubs of activity. There's lots of people coming in and out of the yards with veterinarians, nutritionists, AI technicians, employees. And so what can dairies do to minimize the number of people coming on that may be a risk for COVID-19 introduction or spread?
One of the things we talk about is, putting up some signs at the entrances. the Midwest, the Iowa nice, right? We're always very welcoming, and we're proud of what we do on our farms. We take excellent care of our animals, but in this case, we might want to put up some signs that discourages that entry unless they're essential, and making sure that someone arriving at the farm has got contact information. They can still call you and have that conversation. The bonus of this, of having less people on farm, is it also benefits cattle health, because it reduces the chances of something coming in on a person or a vehicle that could be carrying a cattle disease. So, that one step could have benefits not only for the people on our farm, but for our cattle. Next, we encourage establishing plans with milk and livestock haulers, anybody delivering feed or fuel or propane. You mentioned our AI technicians and other essential farm visitors. What do they need to do to enter, exit, and then conduct business, all the while maintaining that 6 foot of social distance with other individuals? Maybe they need to wear gloves when they exit. If they are going to be closer than 6 feet, they need to wear that cloth mask, just like we're recommending in regular settings. Think of other ways to get business done. I will tell you, the creativity that has come out of people in a challenge like this is astounding. So what other ways can you still get business done? Telephone and video conferences. Use that to talk to nutritionists, bankers, loan officers, our great extension personnel, right? We're all so connected through our phones and, internet access. Not everybody's got great access, but for those that do, try and use that as a way to stay connected. Lastly, the American Association of Bovine Practitioners, AABP, worked with National Milk Producers Federation, as well as the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, to create a document called Temporary Guidance for Veterinarians and Producers, Telemedicine in the VCPR, and that stands for the Veterinary Client Patient Relationship. So this guidance is available on all of those organization websites. And this is a piece that, talk with your veterinarian, discuss those animal health care needs, and devise a plan for a safe farm visit. Telemedicine, and we have to follow the VCPR and our state regulations. But those are all new tools in the past, several years, and we're getting better because this COVID-19 emergency has forced us to look at ways that we can still interact, get the information we need, but do it in a different, maybe safer way.
Danelle, thanks for sharing the highlights of this article. Would you mind sharing where this resource can be found, and how might we contact you if we have further questions?
You bet. The article can be found on the National Milk Producer Federation website. So nmpf.org. And then if you look under COVID, you'll find this resource there. And you can also go to your favorite search engine and just type in Maintaining Cattle Biosecurity COVID-19, and it should pop up for you. If people need to reach me, best way is email. My email address is 3 short little letters. So D for Danelle, B for Bickett, W for Weddle, at iastate.edu. That email again is dbw@iastate.edu.
Well, thank you. Any other final thoughts for today's podcast?
Yeah, I think it's really important for listeners to remember that COVID-19 is not known to cause disease in cattle. COVID-19 is a human disease. It causes respiratory symptoms like coughing, fever, shortness of breath, and even death in people that suffer from severe cases. While there's a lot of unknowns about this virus, the principles we've put in place to limit disease spread between animals can be used to protect people too.
Well, Danelle and Fred, I want to thank you both for being on the show here today. You've given us a lot to think about as we implement these biosecurity strategies amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. We talked about preparing the business of dairy operation in the advent of a COVID-19 situation with the dairy farm, and mentioned resources that are available through Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. So again, I want to thank you both for being on the show, and thank our audience for joining us today, and look forward to visiting with you on the next Dairy News and Views from ISU. This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or combination inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/diversity/EXT.